Hello. I'm gonna pick up where Michael left off. I'm gonna grab the next 11 minutes of this video.
Being trans is not a costume I take off at the end of the night. It's not a fashion choice. It's not a pet name some people call me. It's part of who I am as a person, you know? It's part of my humanity.
Hold on. So you're saying that it's not a costume. Now, I think your definition of costume might be fucked up or very superficial. Because to me, a costume is something that you do or put on or perform or ingest to mask your outward appearance. It doesn't just have to be a piece of clothing or makeup or hair. So for you to say that it's not a costume that you put on and take off every day, that would mean that you don't wear gendered clothing, you don't have a gendered hairstyle, you don't put on makeup. That would mean that you don't ingest hormones. That would mean that you don't perform surgeries on your body. Like, that's all a costume.
It's also the kind of body I have, a transsexual body.
There's no such thing as a transsexual body. There's no such thing. Because there are just loads and loads of trans people who do not perform any surgical change on their body, who do not ingest hormones. There are trans people who just exist in their body as they are, and that's just the body of the sex that they are. That's not a transsexual body. You're just a male body who's performed surgeries on your body and ingested wrong sex hormones to have the appearance of a female human. You still have a male body. It's not a transsexual body. There's no...
So telling trans people dress however you want is not really a supportive statement.
Unless what? Like, it's fully a supportive statement. Unless you're a trans medicalist. Unless you think that people need to take wrong sex hormones and surgeries that are detrimental to their health to the tune of like around $100,000 and possibly going through 70 surgeries. A female who says and thinks that she's a male but doesn't perform any surgeries or ingest any hormones would have a transgender body. And by that definition, J.K. Rowling saying dress however you please and call yourself whatever you like would absolutely be satisfactory to that person who believes and thinks that they are the opposite sex but doesn't perform any body modification. Who made you the arbiter of all things trans? Genuinely, I would like to know. By definition, and by definition, I mean the cult's definition, you're being transphobic and exclusionary to those whose transition solely consisted of a change of clothes and a change of name. Your community can't even present a cohesive description of what transgenderism is, nor do you have any coherent argument against third spaces and accommodations for trans people, instead of eroding women's rights in favor of your activism.
Unless you're supporting YouTubers wearing Louis Vuitton socks, YouTubers are constantly dragging each other because we see ourselves reflected in the other, and we can't stand the sight of it. So after the Maya Force Tower tweet, Joanne was silent about trans people for 6 months. But she took up the cause again in June 2019, first to complain about the use of the phrase people who menstruate in the title of an article trying to include trans men and non-binary people in a discussion of period poverty.
I think it's really creepy that you chose this tweet to pick on. You have no room to speak on women's issues when it comes to menstruation. Not a leg to stand on.
That same night, Joanne tweeted a thread, again repeating the slogan that sex is real, adding,
"It isn't hate to speak the truth."
Slogan? Sex is real is not a slogan. Sex is real is a statement. A reality-based statement. Gaslighting.
And concluding with another backhanded statement of support.
"I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans."
How is that backhanded? It's not backhanded. That's gaslighting again. I genuinely hope J.K. Rowling sees this video, and I hope she sues you for defamation.
If you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans? If?
If, yeah, if.
Widespread discrimination against trans people is well documented.
Widespread discrimination against women, against lesbians, against feminists is well documented. UK, a birth coach who spoke out on social media about what she perceived as the erasure of women from medical language has been driven from her post by transgender activists. 20 activists wrote letters of complaint to Doula UK claiming that the birth coach had made trans exclusionary comments by describing a woman as an adult human female and stating that only women give birth. Canada, Kitchener, Ontario. On January 4th, 2021, Heather Mason, former Canadian federal prisoner and advocate for women in prison, tweeted that numerous women at the Grand Valley Institution, GVI, for Women were contacting her to express their fears over a violent male prisoner housed with them. France, Paris. On August 12, 2020, Marguerite Stern tweeted that for her own safety, she had to move from her home due to threats from trans rights activists. Ms. Stern launched the Collage Féminicide movement in August 2019, which involves pasting posters on city walls denouncing male violence against women. The movement quickly spread to various cities across Europe. This is a website documenting the online harassment and abuse of lesbians, many of whom are detransitioned women. TERF is a Slur is a website that documents the hate, abuse, and harassment that gender-critical women, radical feminists, or anybody who just doesn't follow gender extremist ideology blindly will experience. As the UK publishes its first census of women killed by men, here's a global look at the problem. 6 women are killed every hour by men around the world, most by men in their own family or their partners. A new report shows that in the UK, a woman is killed by a man every 3 days. COVID-19 is overshadowing the issue, the United Nations says. On International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the UN is calling on nations to act. The latest UN figures show that 137 women across the world are killed every day by a partner or member of their own family. A total of 50,000 women a year murdered by people they know and should be able to trust. As the world grapples with the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and its negative impact on women, a pandemic of femicide and gender-based violence against women is taking the lives of women and girls everywhere, says Dubravka Simonovic, a UN human rights expert. Violence against women and girls is still so deeply embedded in cultures around the world that it is almost invisible, the UN says, describing it as a construct of power and a means to maintain the status quo.
In fact, the same week as Joanne's tweet, the Trump administration removed non-discrimination protections for trans people in healthcare and health insurance.
The same week that you released this video, Biden erased women entirely.
So, are you marching with us or not, Joanne?
You're not even saying you march with us. You haven't even suggested it yet. This video is actually stating the complete opposite, that you would not march with us, and that you are not marching with us, that you are marching directly against us. Who do you think you are demanding things of J.K. Rowling anyways? The condescension in your voice every time you call her Joanne.
There's a lot of stuff in these tweets that might seem innocent enough to the average person, but which to someone who understands bigotry against trans people raises a red flag.
Every time they put that red flag on the screen, I just want you to know it's an indication that you're being coercively controlled. Either it's an example of being gaslit, narcissistic validation, manipulation, projection, cognitive dissonance, or word salad. Just keep an eye. I'm going to point it out every time anyways.
No one is born thinking that the gays are destroying the family, or that women are naturally subservient, or that the Jews are trying to control the world economy. So if you aren't familiar with these prejudices, you might not notice anything wrong with them. He never said he hated the Jews. He is simply concerned about the overrepresentation of Jewish people in media and banking.
How can you ethically compare anti-Semitism to feminism and the women's liberation movement? This is extreme misogyny. Calling feminism and fighting for women's rights bigotry is misogyny.
But if you're aware, woke if you will,
there's a difference between woke and awake. Conservative homophobes will say to lesbians that they just haven't met the right man yet. Woke homophobes will say to lesbians that they just haven't met the right male to female yet.
And it kind of rings alarm bells when you hear someone repeating bigoted talking points.
We're being gaslit again.
When I see Joanne tweeting about how trans people think sex isn't real, and they're erasing same-sex attraction, and they're silencing women, alarm bells are ringing because I recognize these as familiar transphobic talking points.
This is also called cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the inconsistency between beliefs, behavior, and information. So having a hard time receiving the information and acknowledging the behavior of J.K. Rowling. So changing a belief and gaslighting us with that in order to release the psychological tension that it's experiencing due to the cognitive dissonance.
TERF talking points.
Gaslighting.
TERF means
Totally extraordinary real female. It's just the new feminazi.
God, are we still talking about this?
Yeah, you are still talking about this because you're obsessed with us. Like, obsessed.
I promise, this is the last time.
Good.
TERFism is it's a hate movement that disguises transphobia as feminism.
So this is another example of narcissistic gaslighting and invalidation. It's dehumanizing, it's diminishing, it's showing a lack of empathy, it's showing entitlement, it's showing arrogance, also grandiosity, all of it together, okay? Insinuating that women who fight, oh my god, I can't believe I have to say this so many times. I can't believe it. This is grooming, oh my god, on such a crazy level. Like, how many times? Calling feminism and women's liberation a hate movement is the most misogynist thing I've ever heard. Make no mistake, this is an attempt to make you question your sanity and reframe reality as something other than what it is, to their advantage. Women fighting to maintain sex-segregated spaces for vulnerable, abused, traumatized women are not hateful. Women who are trying to maintain and protect girls' and women's sports in order to ensure that the female sex does remain able to train and compete on a fair and level playing ground is not hateful. Women fighting for their bodily autonomy to make sure that they will have access to female healthcare providers and health services deemed necessary for those female bodies are not hateful. Fighting to make sure that women maintain their representation in politics and in law to ensure that our bodily autonomy rights are maintained is not hateful. You framing it as hateful is narcissistic abuse.
Bigotry has a history.
Every time they call feminism bigotry, they're grooming the audience.
The foundational TERF text is feminist professor Janice Raymond's 1979 book, The Transsexual Empire, The Making of the Male, in which Raymond argues that, quote,
all transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves.
Janice Raymond doesn't sound like that. And the fact that you chose that quote and you think that you did something other than prove it to be true.
She claims that trans women are agents of the patriarchy who, quote,
merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women.
Yeah. And you reinforce the misogynist, patriarchal sex stereotypes that women have been fighting against for ages.
This book set the general tone for feminist transphobia.
Feminist transphobia is not a thing. It doesn't exist. You can't just make things up.
And I bring this up because I want to give you a sense of how this kind of transphobe talks when they're not afraid of Twitter backlash.
I'm being trolled, right? We're all being trolled. We're all being trolled, right?
Typical male narcissist, Nathan manipulates his cultish audience into thinking he's the victim of the big old meanie TERFs. If you keep calling me Nathan, I'm gonna call you Nigel.
Why would you call a woman whose name is Nigella Nigel? Like, isn't that transphobic? If you're saying that her calling you Nathan is transphobic, then you calling a woman you disagree with a male name would be misogynist.
Cheerio, old chop. Or whatever you people say. Here's the thing, Nigella. Bigotry can be mean, yes, and it usually is.
When it says bigot, it just means a woman who won't conform to gender ideology extremism.
When bigots think they can get away with it.
What do you mean get away with it? Because women can't even say anything online without being banned from Twitter and having our videos deleted from YouTube and being stalked on TikTok and having Kiwi Farms pages made about us and being doxxed and receiving death threats and being suicide baited. So, like, what do you mean?
But it's vital to recognize that being mean is not the essence of bigotry. Bigotry can be hateful, yes, but specifically, bigotry is hate that poses a political threat to the target group.
We can't pose a political threat to the trans cult. We've had all of our rights removed in multiple countries. We can't be the bigots because we can't be the oppressors because we're not male.
The fundamental problem with TERFs is not that they're mean, it's that they're politically reactionary. They want to reverse the progress of trans liberation.
Reverse the progress of trans liberation. What liberation from what? We're not interested in reversing trans. We're interested in getting our rights back. We're interested in being a protected sex class again. We're interested in being seen as humans.
In the final chapter of The Transsexual Empire, Raymond lays out her solution to the trans question, quote,
The problem of transsexualism would be best served by morally mandating it out of existence. I believe that the elimination of transsexualism is not best achieved by legislation prohibiting transsexual treatment and surgery, but rather by legislation that limits it. I would favor restricting the number of hospitals and centers where transsexual surgery could be performed. The kind of counseling to pass successfully as masculine or feminine that now reigns in gender identity clinics only reinforces the problem of transsexualism.
Those are some great excerpts, and I'm not sure what your problem is with them.
She goes on to argue for alternative feminist consciousness-raising therapies, admitting,
I am not so naive as to think that they will make transsexualism disappear overnight, but they would at least pose the existence of a real alternative to be explored and tried.
Again, I don't see the problem with that, because what is the problem with trying to heal people's traumas and mental health issues before resorting to life-altering surgeries that will require medication until death? What's wrong with that?
so like homophobes, TERFs have
Like homophobes, TERFs nothing. How are you calling gays and lesbians homophobes?
historically advocated a kind of conversion therapy aimed at eliminating transsexual identity and behavior. And like the anti-abortion movement, they recognize it's not yet politically practical to completely make illegal a medical procedure they don't like, so they settle making it as difficult as possible to get one.
You have some nerve comparing abortion, a life-saving medical procedure that women absolutely need because their lives are at risk if they don't have them sometimes. My very own baby sister-in-law just had to have a DNC done and a tube removal because of an ectopic pregnancy that could have killed her. To elective, superficial, medically unnecessary surgeries that are not absolutely required for survival. Misogyny.
In 1980, Janice Raymond authored a report to the Department of Health and Human Services repeating her arguments against transsexualism, which was cited in the 1981 decision that Medicare would not cover transition-related healthcare. That decision wasn't overturned until 2014.
It shouldn't have been overturned.
So there's real political consequences to bigotry. It's not just a matter of being mean. Polite bigotry can be just as dangerous. Unlike Janice Raymond, J.K. Rowling seems totally convinced, and very intent on convincing all of us, that she's a totally progressive LGBT ally who loves and supports trans people.
Stop telling other people what someone else is or is not, believes or does not believe. You are not inside her head or inside the head of any woman that you're directing this hateful video towards.
While in the same breath, spewing transphobic arguments.
And validation and gaslighting in the same sentence. Wow, you're so impressive.
She's constantly saying things like, I know and love trans people, but I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, none of
the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for
framing concern as bigotry, framing support as bigotry because of the fact that it's not blindly unconditional is gaslighting, and it's a form of coercive control.
A lot of people have a hard time noticing this kind of bigotry, and I think one reason for that is that our common understanding of bigotry is very narrow. People think of bigotry as like judging a group instead of an individual, which is of course a horrible thing to do. I don't care for the English. There's sick people. Or people think of bigotry as hate, something inhuman and monstrous. So when people hear the word bigot, they're expecting someone like Lord Voldemort, some uber-Nazi who despises love and friendship. But the problem with the Nazis was not that they hated love and friendship, but they believed they were defending German blood and soil against Marxist Bolshevism and Jewish contamination. And what were we supposed to do? Not defend the Reich against Polish atrocities?
This is just more gaslighting. They're, again, comparing feminism and the women's liberation movement to Nazism, saying that when we say we're fighting for vulnerable, traumatized women, that we're defending the Reich.
That's how a Nazi actually thinks, right? It's not that they hate friendship. No, they have their own internal logic of victimization and self-righteousness. So when you reduce bigotry to a caricature of pure hatred, you obscure that bigotry is a deeply human problem. You know, sometimes people criticize me for empathizing with bigots.
You don't know how to empathize. Period.
But I believe that understanding bigots is the best defense against becoming one yourself.
I think that ship has sailed.
Because when you dehumanize the villains, you become unable to recognize the villain within.
How is she though? She needs a hot toddy is what she needs. Middle straw because I love the environment. I'm so good. I'm really fucking good.
Keep telling yourself that.
The idea that bigotry is simply hate, I call the Westboro Baptist Church theory of bigotry. It's the idea that bigots are people who outright say, we hate you, God hates you, and we're all marching around with signs about how much we hate you, like the bad guys in that Taylor Swift video. Taylor Swift. Everyone wants to be a gay icon now. Well, I don't. I don't want to be a gay icon. I'm just stuck with you people.
Trust me, you're not a gay icon. And you're not stuck with us. You can go.
Just kidding. Shade never made anybody less gay. This isn't shade, Taylor. Shade is J.K. Rowling telling trans people, sleep with any consenting adult who will have you.
That's not shade. That applies to everybody in the whole entire world. Sleep with any consenting person who will have you. If you're a lesbian, sleep with any consenting lesbian who will have you. If you're a gay man, sleep with any consenting gay man who will have you. If you're a bisexual person, sleep with any consenting person who will have you.
Bigotry is a lot more complicated than just hate. And the video for You Need to Calm Down is just so emblematic of this misconception. Taylor takes the subject of homophobia and turns it into yet another song about haters. But in the real world, backwoods hillbillies stomping around with misspelled signs are not really the problem. The most dangerous bigots are highly sophisticated and powerful people.
Highly sophisticated and powerful people. Honestly, because the majority of the feminists that I know, we're smart, we're sophisticated, but we're not rich and powerful. We're not almighty. We don't have a reach. We barely have platforms. You're lying.
And yeah, there are still blatant homophobes who say it's an abomination, these perverts are spreading AIDS, they're destroying the family, they're recruiting children. But these days, it's much more common to hear, of course I love gay people. Some of my best friends struggle with same-sex attraction. But it's not homophobic to not want LGBT ideology promoted in schools to children as young as 3 years old. Why, it's a full-on assault on religious liberty. I make a convincing homophobe, don't I?
You also make no point. It's irrelevant. LGBTQ ideology does not need to be taught to children.
There's really two different styles of bigotry. They express the same prejudice, but they're very different in tone.
Tone? They're different in tone? What does that even mean? Oh, no, you're gonna give me a word salad here, so let me just listen.
I'll call the two styles direct bigotry and indirect bigotry. Direct bigotry is openly contemptuous. It's a bigotry manifested in slurs and outright discrimination and demonizing the target group and calls for shunning, subordination, or even violence. Whereas indirect bigotry manifests as concern or debate about a host of proxy issues. It's often defensive in tone rather than offensive. Frequently the claim is that a once needed liberation movement has now gone too far, but it's now the activists who are the new oppressors, who are disturbing law and order with violent and chaotic protests, who are victimizing and silencing innocent people by calling them bigots, who are infiltrating the media and replacing good old-fashioned entertainment with politically correct propaganda. And of course, ordinary people are too intimidated to speak out against it because cancel culture is out of control and free speech is under attack.
That was gaslighting. That entire list was gaslighting, okay? The list of direct bigotry is the list of bigotry, okay? And the list of indirect bigotry is a list of... This is manipulation. This is controlling or influencing people unfairly. This is an attempt to get their way by playing on our vulnerable emotions and making us feel guilty and ashamed for protecting ourselves, for fighting for our bodily autonomy, for fighting against narcissistic abuse. This list is formulated specifically to cause women to be fearful and have anxiety about protecting themselves, about engaging in feminist practices, about speaking freely about what we need.